anyone anywhere who has a computer and can figure out Zoom can come.
Right.
So I think that's neat.
Yeah.
How about you? Did your book just come out? I apologize.
No. It came out April 1st.
Oh goodness. So
right
how
in
is
the
it
middle of
going?
it. Yeah. I mean, the first couple of weeks are just like, I can't even think about, it's fine. It's fine. Right. Like, I'm really grateful to have moments like this, but
Yeah.
I don't really feel like the need to do a lot of.
Hey, Pam's here. Hi, Pam. I'm Brian. It's nice to meet you. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you for having us. I think you're among the first wave of exciting virtual events, really setting the stage.
Yeah, thank you. Marie-Helene Bertino is here, and Mary Kim Arnold is here too.
Hello.
I'm going to start letting people in because I see there's a good amount of people here, so I'm going to start letting those guys in slowly.
Okay.
I'm gonna mute.
Yeah, don't be afraid to go on mute and cool. Welcome everyone who is joining us right now. If you give us a moment, we'll be getting started in just a couple minutes.
Hi, Vanessa.
Pam, where are you calling from?
I'm living in San Francisco right now. So we still have a little bit of light coming through. It's 5 p.m. over here.
Very cool.
Where is everyone else right now?
Brian and I are in Brooklyn.
I'm calling from. Yeah, and I'm in Brooklyn as well.
I'm in Rhode Island.
Oh, I went to school in Rhode Island.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Where?
One of my favorite bakeries in the world is somewhere in Rhode Island. I can't remember the exact town name now, but it's called 7 Stars Bakery. I think.
Oh sure, yeah.
Yeah, they show up at all the farmers markets.
Yeah. There's
Hey, hi.
now.
Hello to Jill Capewell from Brooklyn. Hello to Hannah Bay calling from Brooklyn. We got some Brooklynites in the house. Hello, Murray. I've got the, so we'll get started in just a second. I see people coming in, which is awesome.
Hi, Vanessa. Hi, Jenny.
Hello, yeah. South
Sorry,
Philadelphia, nice. Very cool. I'm from outside of Philadelphia, in the burbs of Norristown.
Norristown.
Yeah, in the burbs of Norristown, where bookstores just meant going to the mall. Much love to all the B. Daltons and Walden Books out there.
Walden Books.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right. Well, we're going to get started, and I will just keep an eye on things as we go. Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Gresco. Welcome to the Antibody, a quarantine reading series coming to you on LitHub's virtual channel. Today I'm calling here from my writing studio in Brooklyn, and the weather in Brooklyn today has just been all over the map, from beautiful and sunny to just like terribly dark and stormy to kind of hazy and oppressive. And I feel like it's been a little bit of a microcosm of the kind of week that I've had, which has just been completely up and down, and sometimes felt kind of maddening and kind of enraging. That's not really a word, but a very angry making kind of week, a very intense week. So I'm really, really happy to be here tonight, because it's been a lot. So I hope everyone can just join me in just taking a deep breath and just putting everything aside and settling your body in, because we have three fantastic authors joining us tonight. Mary-Kim Arnold is here. Hi, Mary-Kim. And Marie-Helene Bertino is here. Hi, Marie-Helene.
Hello.
And, hi, and see Pam Zhang is here as well. Hi, Pam.
Hello.
I see a lot of familiar names in the audience. So if you've joined us before, welcome back. Thank you for coming back. If you're new here, if this is your first time, the way that this works is that your mics should be on mute. And I ask that you please keep your mic on mute. We don't have a stage, but we do have a microphone, and we're going to honor the authors when they have the microphone, as each of the three authors are going to read for us a little bit. And at the end of the event, there will be time for a Q&A, so be ready for that. And you can use your microphone at that point, or if you prefer, just chat at us. I do have the chat on for public so that you can show your appreciation of the authors. So please, let them know how much you love them. Let them know what you're thinking. And I guess we just get started. So just get your keys clicking and your fingers tapping for our first author of the evening, who is Mary-Kim Arnold. Mary-Kim Arnold's Litany for the Long Moment, which is an absolutely gorgeous book, which I have right here. Was published in 2018. It's an experimental memoir about her adoption from Korea, and it's been honored by the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association, featured in NPR's Code Switch, their 2018 book guide, and was named by Entropy magazine as one of the best nonfiction books of 2018. Mary-Kim's poems and prose have appeared in such publications as Conjunctions, Hyperallergic, Poem-A-Day, the Georgia Review, the Denver Quarterly, and the Rumpus, among other places. Mary-Kim holds a BA and MFA from Brown University, where she currently teaches in the nonfiction program. And she has a new book out, which is called The Fish and the Dove. Hi, Mary-Kim.
Hi, hello. Thank you so much, Brian. It's so nice to be here with all of you. This is The Fish and the Dove. I'm going to read three poems tonight. And I guess my disclaimer is that, like, in a reading situation, I always wish that I was like a funny writer, because it's somehow like more fun in some ways, but I'm not. So I'm just giving you warning. And particularly tonight, I was hoping I would have something light to read, but I really don't. So I'm just giving you fair warning. I'm going to read three of the self-portrait poems in this collection. That was a terrible way to start a reading, I know, I'm sorry. This is called Self-Portrait as Semiramis. Had I been raised by doves, wouldn't I have learned to fly? By wolves to hunt in packs? Had I been raised by gods, wouldn't I too be godlike? In the movies, the orphan is the killer, not loved enough, unwanted, but wasn't I most wanted? My mother, fish goddess, dove into the sea for the sin of loving a mortal man. I love a mortal man too. At night, I coax him from sleep, rousing him with my mouth. By day, we build high brick walls around us, our Babylon. Had my mother lived to see me rise from this boundless deep, would she recognize me as I have grown large and my arms have become the long arms of the sea, reaching over and over for the shore? As Brian mentioned, I am an adoptee from Korea, and in my memoir, I talk a bit about sort of a failed search for my birth mother and a trip back to Korea that I couldn't really take until after my adoptive mother had died, and she died in 1992 when I was about 20. So these next two poems are a little bit about that. Self-portrait as praying mantis, abandoned Korean daughter. Let my body emerge from these dry brown husks with black dots for eyes and voracious, mouths like fly paper, summer's dry heat, shedding skin. Does not rain for days, does not give way. The Korean goddess of rainfall is asleep in the north. The only woman who can tell me about my mother is 6,000 miles away and dying, sends me letters on blue paper so thin it is translucent, hangul small and tight, yielding nothing. Nymphs are born by the hundreds. At birth, they resemble adults. Who do I resemble? From time to time, I remember Saint Anthony, patron saint of lost things. The nuns teach us to invoke him. Saint Anthony, please look around. Something is lost and cannot be found. Ask the woman for a name, for one word or two that will describe my mother, but my letters come back unanswered, years and years unanswered, years of looking for a name to drape across this cradle of time, name to stitch into this swaddling blanket, name to burn into this skin that must resemble her skin. From time to time, I remember sparrows bathing in dust, wild turkeys strutting through the dry brown yard inside the house, bowl of persimmons on low table, and a woman, hair falling down her back, looking away, never turning to see, never turning back, never looking for me. Saint Anthony, patron saint of lost causes, please look around. In the garden, they lay in wait, then strike, death grip on their unsuspecting prey, so fast. Oh mother, my method is ambush too. I will wait for so long, will spend the days waiting, but then when you are close enough, I will come at you fast and I will take you apart. And this last poem is for my adoptive American mother. I have found that during this time period, all kind of old grief is very present along with the current grief. And so my mother has been much on my mind. Self-portrait as ungrateful American daughter. Don't know quite how to tell it, that we ate in silence at the restaurant near my dorm before my mother drove back home alone. That I was glad to be rid of her, having spent the long weekend with her in the stifling air of the house I grew up in, lying in bed that morning, listening to her tinny radio news as she put the dishes away. Then in silence as she drove the 4 hours to bring me back to campus. Don't know how to say that once she left, I got high with my friends. This is what we did then, on our backs with music playing. She made it home, but barely. The pain in her stomach so bad she drove herself straight to the hospital. Her appendix burst, spilled its cancer out, very aggressive, and spread through her abdomen. Don't know how to say I got the phone call still high. Thought, what the fuck is she calling me for now? But it wasn't her. It was her sister to tell me that my mother was coming out of surgery and they thought it went okay. Then I hung up the phone and went back to my friends for a while before I packed a bag for the train. She was home for a few days before she had to go back. Very aggressive and very rare. Gelatinous tissue that spread through her abdomen and made its way to her womb. So rare it is called an orphan disease. This orphan lodged in her belly, grew there, grew large, that she called it l'enfant and patted it as she stood in the doorway on one of the few afternoons she could still stand, and laughed a little. L'enfant terrible, crowded everything out. Don't know how to say that the surgery they wanted to do is called debulking, a terrible word. Don't know how to talk about the lurid frailty of the body, its horrible mass. It was too late for debulking anyway. The cancer insinuated so deep and l'enfant growing so big and fast. Time was not something I had thought we'd run out of. So many years of silence when we had stopped saying anything of importance. We either fought or cried when we were tired, when she was tired, when in the end I left abandoned her. I had never really wanted another mother, rejected her as surely as the blue velvet coat she bought me when I was a child. She had hung it on my bedroom door, and when I saw it, marched into the kitchen with it, holding it out and shaking my head. I wanted red. What I had wanted was red. What she offered would never be what I wanted. It was the coat, and then it was other things. The way a grain of sand becomes a stone, the way a stone becomes a mountain, the way a mountain can stand against years of artillery fire, but wears its scars across its face. In the end, you still have to choose. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Mary Kim. That was amazing. Everyone, you can show a little love for Mary Kim in the chat there. I gotta tell you, Mary Kim, there's one of the things about doing an event online like this, as opposed to in a embodied space, is that lack of applause that happens at the end of a reading. But this time, I feel like silence feels right, you know. This kind of quiet. That was really, really beautiful. And that thought too of old and new grief being, that line being very permeable is, yeah, I agree. It's in a moment of trauma, other traumas come up, right? Yeah, really gorgeous. Can I ask you a question about the new book? Is it the Litany for the Long Moment has pictures and kind of artifacts in it, and feels in some parts very much like a piece of book art. Is the new book similar or more traditional, just poems?
Yeah, it's more traditional poems. There's one long poem. It's right at the end. There's about 5 or 6 pages that is of a series, and they are text images. They're little text boxes over sort of text images, but that's as close as we get to images. But it did come out of the, as you may be able to tell, it came out of a lot of the research that I was doing about the Korean War and sort of related things. So they do feel related in a certain way.
That's cool. I love too when projects reach over text, over books. That's very cool. Well, I've got sharing a link here. I've partnered with Greenlight Bookstore. Hopefully that link works when it comes up, but you can order. It's currently on back order right now at Greenlight, but you can bookmark it or add it to your cart and purchase it at a later time when it's back in stock. That's Mary Kim Arnold's The Fish and the Dove. So please support our author and support our local bookstores. Cool. Thank you so much again, Mary Kim. Cool. All right, moving right along. Our next reader is Marie-Helene Bertino. Marie-Helene is the author of the novels Parakeet and 2 a.m. at the Cat's Pajamas and the story collection Safe as Houses. She was the 2017 Frank O'Connor International Short Story Fellow in Cork, Ireland. Her work has received the O. Henry Prize, Pushcart Prize, the Iowa Short Fiction Award, the Mississippi Review Story Prize, fellowships from MacDowell, Sewanee, and New York City's The Center for Fiction, and has twice been featured on NPR's iconic Selected Shorts program. Formerly the associate editor of One Story and Catapult, Marie-Helene now teaches at NYU, the New School, and Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe. And she's joining us now from Brooklyn. Welcome, Marie.
Hello, it's so nice to be here. Mary Kim, that was beautiful. And can I start by saying hello to my new school students, because I'm watching them comment all the way down the line. Mary Kim, you have at least 15 new fans from the new school. I'm watching them go totally bananas over your beautiful, beautiful reading. You honored us. Thank you so much. It's so nice to be reading with you and with you, Pam. I love these books, and thank you, Brian, for inviting me. It's a nice light in this strange time. I'm just gonna read the first couple pages of Parakeet, Parakeet is coming out on June 2nd. Speaking of green light, I was supposed to have my launch there. It will now be virtual with green light. So at some point, I will post what that launch will look like when we figure it out. But I thought I would just share the first couple pages with you all. Thank you so much for having me. What is the internet? 1 week before my wedding day, upon returning to my hotel room with a tube of borrowed toothpaste, I find a small bird waiting inside the area called the antechamber and know within moments it is my grandmother. I recognize the glittering hematite eyes, the expression of cunning disapproval. The odor of a gym at close of day encircles her. What is the internet? The bird says, does not say. Her head is the color of warning, sharp curve, yield yellow. The eyes on either side of the Cro-Magnon crown are lined, the way hers were, in shoddy cornflower pencil, as if to say, really look here. Her hair, that had throughout her life hurled silvery messages skyward, has been replaced by orderly navy stripes that emanate down her pate like ripples in silk. Under the beak where her unpronounced chin would have been, 4 regal feathers pose, each marked by an ebony dot. She hovers inches above the sofa's back, chastened and restless by her new form. The toothpaste lands with a dull thud on the carpet. Silent when stunned, there's no getting me to talk. What is the internet? My grandmother the bird insists, speaking as if we are in the middle of a conversation, which in a way we are. She had called to ask this question 10 years before. At the time, I considered explaining the technological phenomenon, but she was so old. What would be the point, I reasoned, of telling her about the show priming to begin after her exit? There have been many times in my life when encountering an opportunity to do good for reasons of shyness or shock, an unwillingness to leave a safe perch has made me balk. So I told my grandmother the internet was solely for engineers and that its effect on society would be nominal. And the following day, she climbed a ladder poised against her house, meaning to hammer a warped shingle. Something like a phone call, we were never certain, summoned her. She misremembered the ladder and fell from the roof. After she was gone, every room was a nothing room. I don't regret letting others rush forward to care for strangers in need. I don't regret calling my brother a shit on his wedding day. However, lying to my grandmother about the internet placed a painful pebble at the bottom of my stomach that would not go away. Now my second chance claws the rim of a water glass in present internet-rich day, as alive as the rest of us, trying to sip through her beak and failing. It turned out to be more influential than I led you to believe, I say. No shit, she says. Tasked with explaining it, I realize how little I know about the internet. It began as numbers on a screen. I make a blurping sound to signify dial-up and explain that it went from a device only a few people had to Wi-Fi, which I think is in the air. I gesture to indicate exploding. Network names showcase a defining feature of the user, I tell her. Biscotti worshiper, sad oboe girl. Because everyone is famous now, no one is, which is, like everything else, a good and bad thing, I say. I say words like link, blog, router, spam. Even as a bird, my grandmother's dubiousness is unmistakable. The cocked avian focus, doubting me. When she was alive, she preferred staying in her slippers all day and the term shove it to anything, maybe even to my grandfather, who over time became a scudding booted shadow in the house's secondary rooms, in the garage, winding a clock, in the spare bedroom, repairing an outlet, shove the clock, shove the outlet. If my grandmother ever regretted slicing into another's feelings like fondant, she never admitted it. Any room that contained her was merry. This was a big deal for me, since most of my childhood felt panicked and serious. She'd listen and move her eyebrows in a way that corrected my perspective. With a gaze, she could lift me older. When you can see anyone at any hour, I tell the bird, it collapses perspective and time. Add to that the isolation and distance from which most people observe, and the internet gives the impression that one person is simultaneously having a party, turning 50, scuba diving, baking with a great aunt. Sounds like a giant panic attack, she says. That's not technology's fault, I say. The internet is indifferent. It's the people who ruin it, posting only highlights like every night is Saturday night. But most of life is Wednesday afternoon, and no one seems to think that's meaningful. They omit loneliness and tedium. And the people who do post honestly are considered whiners. The bird huffs, nods. No one should bother anyone else with their problems, she says. This had been a phrase she used in life and one of the fueling philosophies of my family. What a waste of time. I change the screen option and a grid of photographs appears. People have their own page on their preferred platform. I scroll so she can see. A frosted cake, dog on a forest path, pulled taffy, a sign, do not shelve items in aisle 3 without speaking to Joanna. Bunting in a desert town. Apron gelato server hovering over delicate pastel vats. It's a good way to connect with what are called friends, I say. Not like regular friends. Usually it's like the guy who plays softball with your coworker. Who wants to be more connected, the bird says, does not say. Everyone is friends now? No, I think people dislike other people at the ratio they did before you. We're not going to get very far if you can't say died. It's called virtual, I frown. I'm not describing this correctly. You're describing it fine, she says. How would you know, I say. At the same time, she says, but how would I know? I've come a week early to this inn on the shaft of Long Island to prepare for the transition from woman to wife, to do what the groom calls decompress, because of late I've become a bit of a monster, to break apart if necessary, but to do so properly, amid slatted pool chairs and conference coffee. I'm 36, ethnically ambiguous, and hold an intense job I do not like, biographer of people with traumatic brain injury. I present their lives in court using storyboards and dioramas. Everyone is thrilled I'm getting married. No one can believe I found such a sweet man. Everyone adores the treats sold in this town that are hybrids of bagels and flatbread. Bagels and flatbread. Flagels. There are fleets of staircases and elevators in this town and floors large enough to simultaneously host several cathartic events. In another banquet hall, another wedding will run alongside ours. The plural of catharsis is catharses. The turnover is quick. Already a lobby poster welcomes attendees of the following week's conference that seems to be about technology and clouds. The inn is buckled to a famous lake that features prominently on the town's signage. I prefer the ocean because it is ugly and secretive and moody and can growl. But mind you, I'm awful and rarely satisfied. I'm not sure if you're aware what day you've landed on. I speak to the bird in the grated voice you employ for a guest who's arrived too early. It's Sunday. I'm getting married in 6 days. I gesture to the migration of folded cards that cover the carpet in ecru V's, anointed with all I can recall from high school calligraphy. Have you come to wish me well, I say? Married. The edges of her projection spit and haul. Do you think I'm here to ask about wires in a box? She goes transparent and her skeleton shows blinding bright. Then whatever debatably divine force is conjuring her regains composure and she is opaque again. There is something I want you to do. Of course, I already know. Knew before she asked about the internet. Knew before rounding the corner to the antechamber and finding a judgmental budgie. All the while, a turbulence spreading beneath my breastplate, which contains the maddening carbonation that could signal only one person.
Thank you, Marie. That was
Thank
awesome. The internet as panic attack feels just right to me.
Perhaps one empathizes.
Yeah, and I love that you described the debatedly divine power that brought her back. It's very cool. But I've got a question for you. What magic are you weaving in your classes to you've clearly got there's so much love here, and I've spoken with one of your students at the new school, Jenny Ryan, and she told me so many great things about you. So what are your secrets in the classroom?
Oh man, I wish I could tell you that I had any. I just have been blessed by these new school students. This particular cohort is just a wild mass of magic energy. I do actually teach a class called Magic and Time, and some of them were in that class, and then others were in a workshop, also very special. But I don't know, New School just gathered some really, really special people who have just made this entire year really easy, super goofy, and very silly.
That's cool. Well, as a New School MFA alum myself, I'm
Oh,
happy to hear it.
lucky, very lucky. Yes, it's a great school.
And when does Parakeet come out?
June 2nd.
June 2nd. All right. So the link is going up. You can pre-order a copy of Marie-Helene Bertino's Parakeet. So yes, please do. That was really cool. Thank you again. Cool. Moving right along to Pam. Born in Beijing, but mostly an artifact of the United States, Pam Zhang has lived in 13 cities across 4 countries and is still looking for a home. She's been awarded support from Tin House, Breadloaf, Aspen Words, and elsewhere. And currently she's calling us from where she lives in San Francisco. And she is the author of How Much of These Hills is Gold, which is her first novel. Welcome, Pam.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again, Brian, for holding this. So my novel, How Much of These Hills is Gold, came out 2 weeks ago in this very strange time. So I'm really grateful not only for the opportunity to read with such amazing other writers, both of your books I'm going to snap up immediately after this, but I'm really grateful, Brian, for pointing us to Greenlight, because it's really, really important to support indie bookstores and make sure that when we do eventually come out of this strange pandemic times, that there remain institutions that uphold diversity and community and events like this in real time. So I'm going to read very briefly. All you need to know about this novel is that I wrote it to be a new American epic, a sort of response to and a renunciation of the traditional mythology of the American West, which is all about like white strutting male cowboys. And so this novel starts with these 2 siblings who are children of immigrants, Lucy and Sam, and they wake up one day and discover that their father has died in the night. And they're in this town that is already hostile to them. There's an incident with a gun that goes off, and suddenly the 2 children are forced to flee, carrying their father's body quite literally on their backs. So I'm just going to read a very short fragment right after they've fled town. What could almost make a girl laugh is how Ba came to these hills to be a prospector. Like thousands of others, he thought the yellow grass of this land, its coin-bright gleam in the sun, promised even brighter rewards. But none of those who came to dig the West reckoned on the land's parched thirst, on how it drank their sweat and strength. None of them reckoned on its stinginess. Most came too late. The riches had been dug up, dried out. The streams bore no gold. The soil bore no crops. Instead, they found a far duller prize locked within the hills, coal. A man couldn't grow rich on coal or use it to feed his eyes and imagination, though it could feed his family in a way, weevilled meal and scraps of meat, until his wife, wearied out by dreaming, died delivering a son. Then the cost of her feed could be diverted into a man's drink. Months of hope and savings amounting to this. A bottle of whiskey, 2 graves dug where they wouldn't be found. What could almost make a girl laugh is that Ba brought them here to strike it rich, and now they'd kill for $2 silver. I'll end there.
Thank you. That was very. I'm so intrigued by this and the description too of like a new American epic. That's really really exciting. And it's launched to like such, I mean, even in this, I feel like distracted time we're in, I'm seeing it everywhere. So congratulations on a really successful, at least it seems like, launch. I'm putting the link up there to purchase a copy of How Much of These Hills is Gold. So please get one. Wanted to ask, I'm gonna, in a moment, have a opportunity for you guys in the audience to ask some questions. And you can use the raise a hand function under the chat if you want to, use the mic, or you can just chat your question. But I want to start because I'm so curious. I'm always curious about how like the covers of books come together. And I've been noticing, I'm fascinated by the book cover design. So maybe Pam, could you start? Could you tell us a little bit, show us the cover and talk a little bit about it? Did you have input in it?
Sure, it's shiny, so there's like this holographic effect if you hold it up to the light. So the cover, honestly, I was blessed with an extremely brilliant design team. So I think like for me, they read the book and the first iteration of the cover looks pretty similar to how it does now. It had this color palette. It had like these like lines in the back that represent maybe hills or gold. It had these tigers, and really the struggle there was I became really obsessed with exactly how the tigers looked. And rejected many rounds of tigers and ended up tapping into like a network of visual artists I know and getting a friend of a friend who's a very talented illustrator to make the precise tigers. But yeah, I really honestly love it.
That's cool. It's really cool that you also knew the illustrator to make the tigers just like you want. That's really awesome. I'll just go in reverse order. Marie, what about you?
So this is actually the galley. I don't have the finished copies yet, so I don't know if it'll look any different, but let's see. So this was designed by a super great designer named Thomas Colligan for FSG. And it was the second cover we looked at. So the book is about a very uncanny bride on the eve of her wedding. And after her grandmother, Parakeet, tells her to go and find an estranged loved one, she essentially deconstructs for the next 6 days. And it's very much a deconstructing of bride and wedding narratives as she becomes more and more disassociated. So all of that is to say, the first cover was a little bride from the top of a wedding cake underneath a giant cracking egg that I guess was meant to be like a parakeet egg. And it was very arresting, very visually arresting, but I worried that, I guess we had worries that it would focus, it seemed like this little woman was about to be crushed by her own fertility. And since the book is in no way about fertility or anything other than identity and going bananas, it didn't really fit. So Thomas Colligan designed this cover that emphasized the parakeet and the bird more on this upside down, askew hotel elevator, on or up down panel, and made it look more like a Criterion Collection Hitchcock movie. So I was just thrilled and delighted, and I saw the logic and I saw how it went from one idea to the next. And yeah, I too felt really lucky that I was just in the hands of people who knew what they were doing.
That's cool. Yeah, I love the treatment of the text, how it goes up like that. That's really cool. I didn't think of Hitchcock, but now that you say it, I see it. It's great.
Yeah, it's like North by Northwest, but it's parakeet.
Very cool. And Mary Kim, what about you? Your cover is actually the print, as you said when we started, is behind you.
Yeah, I knew going into it that I wanted to have an artist that I knew do the cover. And for the last couple of years, I've been working with this feminist art collective founded by two artists that are friends of mine, Xander Morrow and Pippi Zornoza. And so Xander Morrow is the artist who did the screen print. And I was just flipping through some of her past work, and I saw this, the bow and arrow, and I saw the bird, and it just had the right feel. So I asked her if it was all right, and she was on board. And so it was really easy and great.
That's really
Can you
cool.
put it up there again? I didn't see it. Oh, that's so beautiful. That's gorgeous.
Yeah, it felt really perfect. And there's gold on the bottom, and it's sort of, the book designer, Steve Hale, was able to get some of the shimmer. It's really great. I was really happy about it.
That's really cool. Are there any questions? I've got other questions, but I'm gonna curb that impulse to hog and ask the audience. Do you guys have any questions for our authors? You can chat them in there. I mean, I'll ask. I guess both Pam and Marie, you mentioned kind of like thinking about other stories, kind of behind, like writing either in opposition to or in relationship to other kinds of stories. It sounds like. I mean, like Pam, what were other were there, I mean, I guess besides the general kind of like mythos of the American West and the cowboy, which is an entirely white and male-centric story, were there specific texts that you were thinking of, inspired by, or kind of writing against?
A really formative book of my childhood was The Little House on the Prairie series by Laura Ingalls Wilder. I probably read it like the entire series through over a dozen times. And I also lived for a brief period in Salinas, California, which is the home of John Steinbeck. And there was actually like a huge iron statue of him in front of the public library there. So those are sort of like huge icons in my mind. That said, I will say that like, it sounds very neat to say that I wrote, I didn't start out thinking I was going to writing exactly in opposition to those things. Writing is so subconscious. It was more like after I looked back on my own drafts and was editing, when I realized like there is something here that was probably sitting around in my subconscious for a very, very long time.
Yeah, that's, I love that you said that, because I do think it kind of sometimes can sound like a kind of I don't know, like putting together a puzzle, as opposed to just following those impulses that are in your brain and then realizing that maybe you're putting together a puzzle in retrospect.
Yeah. Especially since there are many students here tonight, I will say that books are extremely messy, and there's no like logical thread you can follow in the creation process. It's only after that it starts to make sense.
Mary Kim, what about you? Are there texts that kind of feed into this, to the Fish and the Dove, as inspirations or as source texts in some way?
Yeah, I think the idea of war, women, the representation of women in war, the absence of women in the documentation of war, except as sort of sexual objects, and yeah, so some of the reading that I'd done about the Korean War that set the stage for Korean adoption ended up spilling over from my first book, ended up spilling over into this book. And it got me thinking about just where were women in narratives of war. And then that sort of spilled out into just what it means to be an American girl growing into an American woman. And a lot of this was written during the 2016 summer leading up to the election. And so this idea of like how women were talked about, where they could be, what they could be in public, sort of led me to think about just American girlhood and American womanhood being like a constant readying for battle in one way or another. So generally, those are the threads, I guess.
Yeah, wow, thank you. That's so interesting too, to think about. I don't know if there's some interesting connections between your answer and Pam's. Marie, what about you? Were there specific kind of marriage plots or marriage stories that you were thinking about?
Pretty much all of them. I just had never read anything about marriage or weddings that said what I needed it to. So I wrote the bride that I wanted to read.
I love it. Always a good impulse. All right, I see some questions up, so I'm gonna flip back here. Hannah Bay from Brooklyn, an amazing writer who has read for the Antibody before, wants to know about research. Were these research heavy books? Marie, since you're on screen, do you want to start? Was this?
Oh, sure.
Did this require a lot of research?
A little bit, in probably a way that you're not anticipating, but there's a trans character in the book, and I am not trans, and it was very important to me to represent the world as I see it and to do so with an enormous amount of respect. So the most work I did along in the research realm was to work with a trans sensitivity reader and do my research, do my homework to make sure I was presenting this character in a way that did justice to her life and her realness.
That's cool. Shout out to sensitivity readers. That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Mary Kim, what about you? I know you did a lot of research, so it sounds like, I mean, some of the research that you did for your first book, it sounds like was applicable here. Was there other avenues of research that you did that were specific to this? Okay.
Yeah, a little bit. I guess the only additional thread that, related to the war is that I was also thinking a lot about museum spaces for other kind of things that I was working on, and kind of Asian collections in art museums and how they got there. And it's just not something that I had thought a lot about before. And so it felt very related to war as well, that the objects get displaced, put in a different context. In one way, they're legitimized. In another way, they're completely, taken out of their cultural context and separated from their origins, which of course has resonance as an adoptee. And so the other kind of research I think I did was just about that kind of museum language and the ways in which it has this kind of obfuscating effect to just kind of gloss over the origin stories of how some of these objects came to be and how they take on meaning. And that to me had a lot of resonance for other kind of institutional governmental accounts of war, how the language to describe these things completely and purposefully obfuscates lived experience and real people.
That's really fascinating. Thank you. And Pam, what about you?
I actually want to sort of like build on what Mary Kim was saying and ask a question back at the question, I suppose, which is like, Mary Kim, I really respond to what you're saying about this like erasure and obfuscation. And that was actually something I thought about deeply when I sort of like looked at the question of whether to do research and how much research to do about the American West in history. Because, obviously I had some foundation in research. I went to like the public school system in California for a period of time. So like I had like general facts and timelines and dates. But at the same time, I think there's like a little bit of defiance in me as someone who isn't represented in the history books tackling this question of history. Because like what you're sort of saying with these museums is like, history books are not a collection of objective facts, and just as museums are not collections of objective facts or like objective items. And I was really interested in finding the line between knowing enough about the background and sort of doing due diligence. For example, I also use sensitivity readers, but also not sort of suffocating my writing by being like, oh, these are the facts that exist, so I can only use these facts, especially when so much of history has explicitly ignored the lived experiences of like women, queer people, people of color, poor people, et cetera, on and on. So I think that's like also an interesting thing to talk about. I'm curious about like where you two also in your research maybe decide like this is enough, or like now I'm going to like claim the right to move past this.
Well, when I do research is an important part of that answer for me. I try to imagine as much as I possibly can first, so that I don't become, so I don't feel constricted by the facts and the research that I do. And then it becomes a matter of, okay, when is the right time to stop and consult others? For me, I do a lot of interviews. That's like my preferred form of research, if that's available to me. And so I stopped probably 3/4 of the way through to fill in the gaps I had left. But I do worry about, and I tell my students this, you can research for 10 years before you write anything, and it kind of tricks your mind into thinking that the creativity is done, the creative process is finished. It can work the same as outlining sometimes. And so I do think one of the jobs you have as a writer is to know how it will work for you personally. How much research will be too much for you, how much will be too little, and when to introduce that part of it into the discovery process.
Yeah, and I'm gonna say something that I'm just gonna say it first and then figure out if I can actually back it up. But I think my process in prose is a little different than in poetry. I feel like were I writing this in prose, I would feel more responsibility for accuracy or for consistency or for even wholeness in a sense of relaying an event or situation. For this collection, a lot of the subjects were starting points and provocations. And so, I still have mixed feelings about certain elements of the book that I won't go into, that I do feel like, oh, I could be called out on, the accuracy or the representation of this. But I feel like in poetry, I felt a little bit more latitude with just taking a situation as a starting point rather than representing it with some sort of completeness.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting to think about, like, right, the fluidity or the looseness or the space that the genre itself might provide you, and the expectation that a reader might bring to that genre. That's really fascinating. I see. Okay, so I've got 2 more questions that audience members have asked. I want to be mindful of everyone's time, but these are good. I want to Sejal, who is also an amazing author of essays and has a forthcoming collection, has a question about the editorial process. And Mary-Kim, maybe you could start with that. I mean, what is the editorial process as a prose writer and not a poet at all? What is the editorial process like with a collection of poetry? Does it require an editor actually like wholesale moving poems around or asking you to remove some poems or add some new poems, or is it completely within the lines of the poems themselves?
It's all of those things. I had Susie F. Garcia at Noemi is an amazing editor, and just so gently and supportively would say things like, so tell me about how this poem works in the collection, which usually meant, I don't think this is gonna stay in the collection. We worked back and forth over about a year. And through that process, maybe I had four versions of the book from the point that they accepted it. And 4 like kind of complete overhauls. Not all new poems, but a bunch of things moved around. Like one poem went back and forth from the middle to the beginning, like 5 times, But yeah, so it's a little bit of all of what you said. I feel really lucky with both of my books to have worked with just wonderful humans and amazing editors.
That's really cool. Pam, how about you? What was editorial wise? What was the process like for you?
So my editorial process took a long time. I edited my first draft for a while by myself, and then I think my actual editorial process with my official editor spanned maybe almost 2 years, in which I probably wrote over 10 drafts. And so I think for me, the way I approach writing is like the first drafts often come not easily, but rather quickly. And I think it's like, all I want to do is not force my editorial brain to be awake during that part. It's like, shut up, go away. just get everything out there. It's more like subconscious. And then later in editing, I want to like be careful and deliberate. And so the most important thing I heard from my editor during the process was she said to me, she would ask all these questions that were frankly pretty logistical. She'd be like, how far is it from point A to point B? What were these people eating, et cetera, et cetera. And what she said to me was, you don't have to put all these answers in the book, and indeed you shouldn't, but you should know all the answers. As the author, you have to know more than what exists on the page. And that sense of authority will come through tonally, in the completeness, in the wholeness of the book and the world, even if, you know, I'm not listing like food logs for each of the characters in the novel. And that was something that like has really stayed with me. And I think like I'm really interested nowadays in having, and it was kind of a relief, right? To not be like, I have to do this perfectly and consider all of these, but be like, there are really two parts of the process. And in some ways there should be tensions and contradictions between them. That's how I think of editing.
I love that. I mean, I'm glad you used the word world, because I was thinking of the term world building, you know, which is maybe a little bit overused, but I do think that, right, in terms of like the authorial kind of command of the space of the world of the book, that's really helpful to think about. And that also brought to mind, Helen Phillips had once told me about what she calls her zero draft, which is just allowing that first draft to not even be a number one, but just to be a complete like kind of vomit of ideas, even if they're contradictory, just in order to get everything that's kind of floating around in her brain out, and then using the subsequent drafts to essentially refine further and further those.
I love that. I've actually sometimes called mine my trash draft, but my publicist doesn't like it when I refer to it as trash. But yeah, and so like when I say like the first draft that I actually showed to someone that felt complete enough to show to someone was probably actually like draft 4 or 5. So I really like the draft 0 idea.
That's really cool. And Marie, what about you?
Again, I feel really blessed with this book. The editing process was pretty easy, breezy, and light. I am also an editor, so and I edited for One Story magazine and Catapult magazine. So I feel like I can say this, but I would love to ask Jenna Johnson, my editor, if she feels the same. I feel like I'm harder on myself than anyone else could be, but that might not be true. And that's not a dare to anyone to be harder on me than I am. I don't want to put that out into the universe, but it was pretty, Jenna is brilliant. And there was one little thing that 4 of us weighed in on that took more time than anything else, I think. There are 2 words in the last sentence that we debated for about 4 days, what those 2 words could be, 2 adjectives to describe the very last word. And the conversations we had around those 2 words in the last sentence over the course of 4 days were probably some of my favorite conversations ever in the editing process.
Wow, that's fascinating, and also like way to make me extremely eager to find out what the last sentence of your book is.
And it's different in the galley too. So friends I have who have read the galley, I tell them, you should know that there are 2 words in the last sentence that will be different in the finished, because we're all perfectionists probably. So I'm like, just know that those 2 words will be different. And they're like, okay, thanks for letting us know. Sure, we wouldn't have noticed, but thank you. Yeah.
That's amazing. All right, final question, and I love this question from Gina out there. Asks, she'd love to know, what kinds of non-writing practices do you do? For example, things that you find yourself doing that are not necessarily working on your writing or researching, but that help you solve problems or think through your work, perhaps even subconsciously. What do you do that's not explicitly writing or researching, but that is indeed a form of writing or researching or feeding that subconscious? Who wants it?
Well, I have one easy answer that probably would never happen again. But when I was writing the memoir, I was also looking for artifacts about my adoption, and I realized that I had lost the dress that I came in, which was, I was 2.5, and it was just a very simple dress. So I tried to recreate it from memory, and I created a pattern, and I also do a little sewing, which led to this project that ended up being an art installation of sewing 200 toddler dresses by hand. So that practice alongside the writing was such a great one, because the writing would get hard and then I would just sew, which is like wonderful and meditative and mindless, but also say that I was working. So I recommend having a side project like that.
Yeah, that's amazing. And yeah, also I love that someone's like, your chill out project became an art installation. I feel the same. Like, this is a very ambitious chill out project. I really dig it. Marie or Pam, what do you think? Go ahead.
Oh, sure. I want to borrow Mary Kim's chill out project. That is the coolest thing I've ever heard. Mine is much more simple: walking. I'm a really big walker these days, the walking cure, and music. And maybe I can say this to everyone who is watching or listening in this very strange time. Music has been the only thing that's cut through everything for me. I sing a little bit, and singing went away and then came back, and music is the only thing that makes me feel relatively normal and in my skin. I'm in Brooklyn. There's a heaviness here right now that is that's not of the body or even the news. It's just here, where it's the collective effect of people grieving together, people fearfully and resignedly getting through something together. And music has been the only thing that has really made me feel awake. And it has been that way in my life for a very, very long time. So if anyone is having trouble right now, there are a few mixes, you can find them on my website, that I've made, that my friends have made, to get you through this time a little bit, if anybody's struggling.
Thank you, Marie. I feel that too, and I've also been feeling my long walks, quiet streets, and music, and much love to your Bowie t-shirt, which is awesome.
Oh, speaking of, right, yes.
Right. Very cool. Pam, what do you think?
I mean, I guess I could say like cooking or something, but honestly, my very, the frank answer is like, I don't have a thing that is productive necessarily. And I actually kind of fight a little bit against this idea that we must find ways to be like productive or doing something that's writing or ancillary to writing all the time. Otherwise we're not writers and we feel bad and guilty. I tend to work in like boom bust cycles, or like write hundreds of thousands of words in like a matter of weeks or months, and then do not touch the page for 6 months. And I'm trying, especially in this very weird time when, like, you know, everyone's like, you're a writer, you must have all the time in the world now to work on your next project. And you're like, that's not exactly how it works. To really fight that idea, which I think is a very capitalist notion, right? That like writing itself must fall under these standards of productivity and like timelines and word counts. And also I think that just like living your life, I wrote a newsletter for LitHub recently, and so this became kind of a manifesto. Living your life is writing. Writing is, you have to have these lived experiences, you have to have these feelings, and then later you will be able to process them and use them or whatever. But don't worry about it is kind of my thing. If something's not working, you're not able to write, don't worry about it.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned capitalism too, because I also very much bristle against the language of business making its way into the language of art. And yeah, you are not a widget maker, and you are an artist, and that takes time. And sometimes the best thing you can do is to give yourself space to just, you know, let go of that guilt. There's no guilty pleasures, there's just pleasure. So, you know, if it's feeling right, like, do that. That's really, really cool. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Mary Kim. Thank you, Marie-Helene. Thank you guys so much. Thank you to everyone here in the audience. It's lovely to see all your comments and all your wonderful names, if not your faces. The Antibody is running for as long as quarantine is, which, you know, who knows how long that will be, but we'll be back next week, April 28th. It'll be our 6th episode. Danielle Lazarin, whose short story collection Back Talk is really amazing, will be here. Jennifer Rosner will be here reading from her new novel, The Yellowbird Sings, and an emerging essayist Audrey Olivero will also be here. You can find the Zoom link. I just shared that, and I'm going to also share, if you want to see readers coming up, there's a schedule, and I'm also going to leave you guys with all of the authors' handles here on Twitter. So please, if you're out there, you know, squawk back, let the authors know you love their work, keep talking, keep reading. Big thank you guys again to the readers and to you guys for coming, and of course to Greenlight Bookstore, our local indie, and also to the Literary Hub. This will be archived on their virtual book channel starting possibly even tonight, so you can share it and watch it. So yeah, so till next week, you guys stay vigilant and safe and healthy and optimistic, and keep reading books. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. Take care, guys. Bye.